I'm glad you're all here in the center. Good afternoon. Welcome to Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. My name is Lee Strucker. I work here in Human Resources, and I manage the Research Ethics and Education program here as well. And it's great to see so many people. What school are you from?
I'm from Garfield.
Oh, Garfield. Okay.
Snuck in.
So we've got Garfield, we've got Kirkland. What else have we got here?
Kitsap.
Kitsap. Excellent. Good. We're good from all over. So let me say a couple things before we get started with this wonderful panel we have here. Again, welcome, not just to Fred Hutch, but to the Science Trek STEM Career Pathways panel discussion. All these folks have slightly different careers in that STEM category. And we're going to talk about how they get there, how they got there, and how much fun they have doing what they do. It's fun, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's fun. It is fun. Science Trek organizations are proud partners of the Seattle Science Festival. This June, our regional schools, universities, cultural institutions, research centers, and businesses are coming together to celebrate the importance of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to our community's future and to its continued growth and prosperity. So again, thank you all for coming out here to celebrate science with us. You know, this panel is between you and these guys here. I'm going to throw out a few questions so that you'll have lots of opportunity to learn what these careers are about. So why don't we get started here? Instead of doing separate introductions, I thought I would just throw out the first question, and that can be kind of an introduction in itself. So the first question is, in approximately 2 minutes or less, does anybody have a
timer?
Okay, so I'll give you can time it. Just go like this when you do it. 2 minutes or less. What's your current job? What's your favorite aspect of what you do? And what's your favorite hobby outside of work? So current job, favorite part of doing your current job, and hobby outside of work. Who'd like to get started today?
I'll go first. That's
All
fine.
right, go. Donovan.
So my name's Donovan Anderson. I'm at the UW Medicine facility that's in Lake Union. And my current job is I'm a research scientist. So what I do during the day is I have several projects that I'm working on. And I come in and see where we're at and decide what experiments to do those experiments and look at the results and then kind of decide on how to go from there. What was the sentence?
What's your favorite part of doing it?
I think the favorite part of that is that that exact part of that changes every day. So what I do is it can change from day to day, and I never know where the results are going to take me. I won't know what I'll be doing tomorrow until I get the results I have today. So that's the most intriguing part for me, is I kind of have a goal of where I want the project to go, but that changes all the time. So it's not repetitive work. It's not assembly line work. And I would say then the next thing is what the favorite thing to do.
What do you like to do outside of work?
Oh, for me, probably what's been really great with Seattle is reading. Just the ability to read not just on the subject that I'm working on, but on other subjects. And Seattle's been really great with that because of just all the bookstores that are here, that it's a very literate culture.
Well, thanks very much, Don. So we'll just go down the road here, I think, and to Seth.
So I'm Seth Orton. I am the Mechanical Architectural Power Plant Preventive Maintenance Planner Scheduler for the Facilities Engineering Group at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. That's the title. So essentially I'm a Facilities and Maintenance Planner Scheduler. And how many of you have heard of facilities management? Are familiar with that or have considered a career in it? Great, one person. So facilities management, and one of the things I like most about my job is facilities management is where sustainability and energy conservation meet real business. So here at the Hutch, we work really hard on finding ways to conserve energy. We've gotten to the point now where we are saving $1.97 million a year on our utility costs based on the about 160 conservation projects we've done over the years. That's the part I'm passionate about. I love that stuff. In the meantime, when I took this job, I moved here close by, just a mile and a half away. And so in my spare time, for my hobby, so to speak, I like to spend time with my wife and 3-year-old. And the great thing about being here is that I can walk, and halfway home they'll meet me at the park, and we'll hang out and watch seaplanes take off. We'll hit a restaurant, and it's just a beautiful place to be. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Seth. Carla.
Cool. My name's Carlin Beer, and I'm a graduate student at University of Washington, but the lab where I work is actually down here at South Lake Union. In 2 minutes or less. So what does a grad student do? So a graduate student is basically a scientist in training. So at one point, Donovan was a graduate student. And so what I'm doing is I'm learning how to do research. And so I have my own research project. And in a nutshell, I'm trying to understand how microbes deal with changes in their environment. I mean, if you're a microbe, you're just one tiny cell. And if you're going to a new environment, you can't just bring a jacket with you if it's cold or something. It's pretty incredible that in one cell there's so many different ways to interact with your environment. So that's the gist of the project I'm working on. My favorite part of it is, to echo what Donovan said, I like that I get to do something different every day. Some days I'm in the lab, some days I'm at the computer writing code, some days I get tired of it and I go drink coffee, you know what I mean? It's really flexible, and I also really love the people I work with. Scientists they're excited about what they're doing, they're passionate about their work, they're fun people. I love my coworkers. And so that's another one of my favorite parts.
How about a hobby outside of work? What do you like to do?
I really love riding my bike. I bike to work, and I bike on weekends, and I like seeing Washington and Seattle, but just on my bicycle.
And I understand that a lot of the microbes you visit are in interesting places too, right? Do you do some traveling to get to those microbes?
Yeah, it's true. So the organism I work on is called Halobacterium salinarum, and I don't know if anyone's been to Utah or seen the Great Salt Lake. Anybody?
Yep.
So if you see the Great Salt Lake from the air, you'll notice that half of it is pink, and that's because of the color of the microbe that I work on. They have a pigment in their outer membrane that makes them look like Pepto-Bismol kind of in flasks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next is Jen.
Hi, so I'm Jen Hume. I work at Seattle Biomed down on Westlake. I guess I'm a little different from the others. I'm a core manager in Seattle Biomed. We have a number of different cores that support the institute, and I manage the insectary core. So many microphones. So the insectary core is, as it sounds, where we grow insects, and what we work on is mosquitoes. So we're growing mosquitoes for research purposes, but also for clinical trials. So we have a malaria clinical trial program at Seattle Biomed, and we support that as well as the research that goes on there. So my job day to day is I have a group of people who do most of the work. I'm just the one who sort of faffs around and tells them what to do and checks up things are working properly. That's what we like. The favorite aspect of what I do, again, I do lots of different things. I get to be involved in many different aspects of the work. And I think for us, being involved in the clinical trials is very exciting. We get to see kind of the fruits of our labors. We get to grow mosquitoes that are infected with human malaria. They're then used to infect people, and then actually I run the microscopy program for diagnosis, so I then get to see the parasites in people. So it's very exciting seeing the whole cycle in action. Outside of work, my favorite hobby probably is dealing with my slightly bad behaved puppy who takes up a lot of my time. And Seattle is very dog friendly, so it's a great place to have a dog.
Thank you very much, Jen.
My name's Marion Dorer, and I work in the Hutch Director's Office. That means I do a lot of different things around here. Everything from, let's see, right before I came here, I was designing a poster for a seminar series that we're organizing that is to have better communication between faculty and staff. So there's lots of us who say work in facilities, and we know that bone marrow transplantation is this amazing thing that the Hutch can do, but do we really know about how that works? And so, let's have a conversation with one of our faculty members, because let me tell you, they know how it works. So I do projects. That project that came to me and said, hey, why don't you organize this seminar series? Sounds like fun. So I get to do that. I get to do projects like put together a 2,000-page grant that is supporting our cancer center, because my official title is the administrator of the UW Fred Hutch Cancer Consortium, which means I will, in a year and a half from now, submit this grant that has 500 cancer center members and all sorts of cats to herd into place.
Longer than all the papers that you've written
Yeah.
so far in your life.
So the range of those projects I'm using to exemplify what my job is, because otherwise, other than that, I'm not real sure, and that's what I really like about it, which is that I get these great projects. They're really interesting. They're really different, and there's always sort of something new coming through the door for me. I'm pretty lucky, I think, in my position like that. Outside of that, my favorite, let's see, one of my favorite hobbies is swimming. That's also an advantage in the director's office because our executive vice president is himself quite a swimmer and likes to check up on my speed on occasion. So, no, it's a lot of fun. I like working here.
That's great. What a great wide variety of things that you do and ways that you enjoy life. Our next question, and we can just start anywhere on this, is how does someone in your field of profession generally get their start?
We can take that. So I think I took probably a pretty similar path to what you've been hearing from here. I started off doing my undergraduate in science, and then I did a PhD in malaria. And that was kind of how I got started into tropical medicine, malaria particularly. And then from there, I followed a traditional path like Donovan was talking about. I was a research scientist for 4 or 5 years. And then from there, I kind of realized I didn't want to necessarily go down the route of managing my own research group. And actually, I was quite good at the management aspect, and I didn't have a burning desire to be at the lab bench every day. I kind of like people doing that for me and giving me the results. So I moved over slightly more into a management side of things while still keeping my hand in on the lab. I still do lab work, I still check up on things, and I help out with some of the work that goes on. But yeah, that was kind of my progression. And I think it's pretty typical for a lot of kind of support staff positions within the institutes.
You know, in facilities management, we saw how many people are familiar with that, right? Saw one hand go up. Traditionally, in our department right now, we have people who had 20 years experience in the Navy who came over and started doing facility management here. We have supervisors who have degrees in microbiology that ended up doing facility management, and what happened was they worked in labs, they started doing quality control, they started helping design new facilities to be built, and they just turned into facilities management professionals, particularly for laboratories. Myself, I worked for about 10 years in maintenance and construction, and I found out there was a degree out there called a Bachelor of Science in Facility Management. Anyone heard of that? I know.
What school was that?
So it's at Fair State University. There are 5 universities in the U.S. That offer a Bachelor of Science in Facility Management. It's a great way to get into facility management. So we come from a lot of different directions, but whether it's based on past experience in building and construction or air conditioning, or whether it's direct schooling for the field of facility management, all those paths lead to facility management, the greatest job on earth.
Pretty convincing.
Someone get started.
I would echo some of these comments here about, you know, the general school education requirements that it takes. My start in science in general really started 3rd or 4th grade. You know, science, it's a lot like what you guys are doing today, is that my mother wanted me out of the house for the summer. So I was signed up for 3 things that are actually really that are part of my passions today, or my interest today, and that's, I was signed up for an art class, I was signed up for a math class, and a ecology, what they call a science class, but it was basically getting out and kind of the basics of biology, ecology. And those 3 things at that age just kind of put me ahead of a lot of kids going in, but just really ignited a fire for me. And so it leads into another question I think that you're going to ask when it comes to twists and turns. I knew then that I liked science because it was just such a broad thing, and that a lot of stuff that you learn growing up is applicable. And I didn't know exactly where I was going to fit in this world, but I knew that that was what I wanted. That was really the most interesting thing for me. So yeah, it's really just, I think the start is just the passion for it. If you find something in this area that you really like, it can be a driver for you.
Thank you.
Well, I would say in general, you could count me as an administrator. I have an somewhat unusual background for administrator because I too have a PhD. It's in molecular biology and genetics. I worked in the lab for about 15 years. I made a somewhat abrupt transition to administration where I decided I wanted something else to do, and I was going to do something else, and this great opportunity came along. It's quite helpful to have my background in scientific administration because people seem to assume that I can understand most science that comes through the center. I have no background in clinical trials, but I get it, and it's easy for me to pick up, and I think that's a real advantage in my position. I think the broader thing I'd say is, I have a PhD, and I don't think anyone goes into a PhD thinking they're preparing for a career in science administration. I think you can go back and say, that's the great thing about a PhD is you're learning to answer questions, you're learning to work independently. Like Jen said, she has you get a project and it's yours, figure it out. So it's the same for me now. I get projects with somewhat limited instruction, and it's for me to go and figure it out, and I don't mind that. I like that. I think, and that's, one of the great things about doctoral training is not necessarily doing it because you're thinking of an exact progression of your career. I'm gonna, get a PhD and then I'm gonna, do X, Y, and Z. It's more a learning to think and a learning to do on your own. And then if you're willing to then accept risks and take the cool job that comes along, it can be pretty fun.
Cool. So I guess I thought it was kind of funny because I'm still a student, so I don't really feel like I have a profession just yet. But I can answer the question in terms of how you get here, and I think similar to Donovan, I always played outside. I loved hanging out outside. I used to bring toads into the dinner table to my mom's dismay. You know what I mean? Just kind of playing around and being interested in the natural world. When I was in junior high and high school, I read a bunch of books about infectious diseases. I don't know if anyone's ever read The Hot Zone. It's about Ebola. Okay, this thing changed my world. I needed to be one of the people in the bubble suits who's, down at the CDC all plugged in and double gloved. I don't want to do that anymore, but that kind of fueled the path that I have taken, and kind of similar to what Marianne was saying is, I'm working on microbes in the Great Salt Lake right now, but I didn't want to do that with my life. I didn't know I was going to do that 5 years ago, and I don't think I'll do it when I'm done, but the PhD is just broadly a great thing to teach you independence, how to think critically about a problem, how to describe and present the way you have thought about a problem, and it's applicable to anything. I could walk into the CDC and say, I'd like to really work on Ebola now. I changed my mind, and people will be like, all right, we know you can think, you have a PhD, and so the subject matter is less important than the process, and I think I really appreciate that about it.
This next question is not, I just thought it's not on your sheet there, so bear with me. But, if you're going to give these folks out here that are students one piece of advice, if they're interested in STEM type careers, what would that be? What would you tell them? Anything you want. Don't do it. No.
Don't do it.
Anyway.
Well, I'd say go out and find an opportunity to work in a lab in whatever you're interested in. Because a lot of I understand that in science in schools, we're trying hard to teach much more inquiry-based science, but working in a lab where you have a problem and you just really don't know what the answer is, it's quite different from most anything else. Yeah. Inquiry-based science would be asking questions as opposed to, my daughter comes home, she's only in first grade, and quotes facts about butterflies. She knows how many different kinds of butterflies are out in their world, and poor thing, of course, she has 2 scientists for parents, and so we asked her questions like, why would you want to know how many butterflies there are out there in the world? How would that be useful? And, an answer to me in that question is, well, if I know how many types of butterflies there are out in the world now, as I'm not an ecologist, so bear with me, but then you would know if 10 years from now or 5 years from now, if you counted again and there was a change, would that be worth understanding? Is that's one piece of data, you have one time point, you could find another piece of data, and if you saw a change there, could you then go back and ask questions about why that change was. So then, of course, I'm asking her questions about, well, if you saw that there were fewer types of butterflies in the world, what would some reasons be why? And that's what a scientist would do, is learn that idea of making a hypothesis. Is it because, I don't know, there's more water in the world now, or there was a nuclear explosion, or an asteroid hit the Earth? I don't know, you know, all these, and then but you can make those guesses and then try to find data and experimental evidence for those differences that one might see. Or you might try to understand how, you know, you go from one cell to two cells, as opposed to just learning what's the mitochondria, it's the powerhouse of the cell.
So you'd get more of that if you were in a lab or a study.
So in a lab, you get a chance to learn, and I'm not up here to say anything terrible about science education today, because I know that there's lots of people are working very hard on science education. But I think it's just a chance to really, because it's just hard to do in a high school lab. It's expensive. It takes a lot of specialized equipment. And so any chance you have to go out and work in a lab, I think, is a great way. That's how I did a high school program. I worked in college, and it really got me interested in being in the lab. Yeah.
Are there any volunteer opportunities, say like at Fred Hutch, to volunteer in the lab, or at Seattle Biotech or anything like that?
Seattle Biomed has a program, the BioQuest program, and they have an open day today where you could stop by and get some information. So we have schools that come in for visits throughout the term, but we also have a summer program. I'm not sure the details, but they could give you some information about it.
And the same thing goes for the Institute for Systems Biology, which is just a block and a half away from Seattle Biomed. We have a summer internship program, and so those are like official conduits for students to get a feel for what it's like.
So at the moment I have a high school student in the insectary getting some training from us. He comes in for credit for part of his last year at school.
It's similar for the Hutch, where there's a pretty broad-based internship program here. And I don't know all the details, but I know if you go on the website, you can find out about summer internships, and it's recently been sort of centralized. There's also, honestly, the opportunity to, although I think at the Hutch now you have to go in through the central route. I've worked in labs where high school or college kids have just contacted directly the labs and said, hey, you know, I'm interested in coming in and working and having an opportunity. And, you know, you may get a lot of no's, but there's also people who will say yes. Yeah. You know, I think to work in a lab at the Hutch, what is it? Is it 16 or 18?
Probably, so I don't know exactly.
But the Hutch does have programs where they do have a teaching lab here where younger students can work in the teaching lab. So I know that you're all less than that, are you? 14 or 15, 12, 13, yeah. Something to look forward to as well.
My general answer to that question would be more of just exposing yourself to things that are interesting. So it's more about just if you there's a subject, whether it's, you know, whales or dolphins or anything about science, and just if it interests you, read that. Sit down and listen to PBS has several like Nova. These interesting. Sit down and watch those and follow. If it's interesting to you, kind of follow up. And it doesn't mean you have to become an expert in the subject, but really get a broad exposure to really kind of just generally life when it comes to what the world we're living in. And that, you'll be surprised at how much that'll lead you down into some just interesting little nooks and crannies and narrows and you'll start to, as you bring the information in, you'll start to develop your own questions. Well, why does that work? How does that work? We'll kind of try to find out how that works. And if you get bored with it, you can kind of come back out and go to somewhere else. But that was, for me, the part where I just got a broad range of knowledge of just being exposed by the resources that are out there. And I just kind of found myself asking questions of why, and let that drive how I learned a lot of things outside of school. And so because that's what will happen is you'll find, I think it's great to be interested in science and technology and energy medicine, but if you go in too narrowly focused on one aspect of it, sometimes you kind of miss the rest of the forest for that one tree that you're looking at. So the generalist is just really try to learn as much as you can, just even if it's just narrow, you know, some small surface bit about a subject. But if it interests you, check it out and look at it for a while and see what it looks like.
So for facilities management, if you like fixing things, if you like getting getting hands-on with stuff, it's a great place for you. It's also a great place for you if you like architecture, if you like to design, if you like to draw and create. I would urge you to be creative. Look for creative outlets related to what you like to do. Space planning, interior design, or even if you just like business. There are multiple ways to get into facilities management, and those are all skill sets that relate. You can have great skills, whether they're artistic or very businesslike, and you can fit, and you can make a big difference. And again, I love the energy conservation side of it. When we talk about fume hoods in a building and fans running constantly that have to be on 24/7 using a bunch of energy, when we find out, wait a minute, we can put in parabolic dampers to reduce the size of the duct to be able to ramp down the fan that's running through those fume hoods because you close the sash on the inside. That makes all the magic happen. You can save tons of energy. And that's stuff that I just get a kick out of. And it turns into environmental improvement. It turns into a good place to work for people who are employed there. And it turns into money savings for the center. And we feel that when we can save money on the energy side for the center, that's money that goes to research. That's money that helps the science. And so there are a lot of ways to look at facility management, a lot of ways to be creative and to be very successful in that field.
Any other advice?
I had one. I was just going to say, just don't be scared of it. And I think a lot of people maybe are put off by a career in science thinking, you know, I'm not the smartest kid in the school. I'm not going to be the person who can do that. But, you know, anyone can do it. And if anyone had said to me, you know, when I was sitting there at your age, I would be sitting here today with a PhD behind me and all these years working in the job that I'm doing, I'd be really surprised. So don't think, you know, it's not for you, that you don't think you can do it, because you really can.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would say two things. I would say one, take math and try not to be afraid of that, and find mentors. Collaborate a little bit on both of those. So I was always really good at math in school, like in grade school, and then I got to high school and I was not so good at calculus, and I'm like, well, I guess this is the end of the line. I'm just, you know, calculus is as far as I can go and I'm not good at it anymore, and that's it. And biology really is computational, and it's very quantitative, and recently I've kind of rediscovered math, and I'm like, I guess I like you after all. And I've got peers who stayed on with it, and they took linear algebra, and they took all these other math classes in college, and now I'm feeling like, man, I wish I'd taken all of those, because what I'm working on could be even more interesting, and I could have so much more to do with the data. And I think math is something that it scares people more than any other subject, and I encourage you to make peace with math and see if you can't find a way to get through it and appreciate it for the tool that it can be in science. And second, finding mentors. And this has been the most important thing for me. And the thing to realize is that people want to help you, and they want to see you succeed. And if you show any interest in something that someone is doing, you'll light up their world, and they'll do whatever they can to help you. And I've really had a lot of experience and success with this. I mean, so again, I'm obsessed with the infectious disease thing, right? And this has been a long time. So I remember being in high school, and my mom had a friend who knew like the state epidemiologist, so the guy who was in charge of tracking down outbreaks for the whole state of Minnesota where I grew up. And she said, well, why don't you talk to him? And I'm like, oh my God, he's old, I can't. Why would he want to talk to me? And I'm in sophomore in high school, and so I called him up. He was scared, but I said, I'm a sophomore in high school, and I really like infectious diseases, and I want to hear about your job. And he told me all about his job, and he said, actually, I just wrote this book. Why don't you read my book? And I said, okay, and I read his book, and it's been 11 years, and I'm still in touch with this guy, and if I wanted a job where he's at, I'd call him up, and I'd be like, hey, can I work with you? And he would have my back like that. And this has happened countless times over the years, and it's just amazing. I'm like, this is too easy, right? Is this all it takes? And it really is. I mean, if you're working for yourself, and if you're working to help yourself, and if you're reaching out to people will pull you along. And maybe I'm smart, but maybe I just talk to a lot of people. I can't pull the two apart.
So reach out, take risks, do the things that you love. Great. those great answers. We have, yeah.
Weird question. Does the biotechnology field, are they doing much in, say, like getting DNA from like old archaeological sites or stuff like that, and comparing it to today's people with DNA, and trying to, compare it and see what's going on, why we have so many diseases and stuff today?
In terms of, so using like archaeological dig sites for
Right,
doing
yeah,
that?
I mean, is it possible to get DNA samples very much from archaeological sites and comparing it and so on?
Yeah, so the idea of ancient DNA is actually really cool, and it is used a lot. The one story in disease that I know of is that I think people have done that with the bubonic plague. So the plague that wiped out a third of the world in the 1300s, they've been able to, from tooth scrapings,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's
and
from tooth.
they've been able to use teeth to try to go back and say what kind of bacteria are on here and how many of these people actually had the plague. So that's one thing. And then there's another, so fossilized organisms. So it's kind of fun and it's really interesting to reconstruct the evolution of organisms throughout history. And so I've got some friends who are working on ancient DNA of lizards and birds and trying to reconstruct the relationships between species that exist now and species that are extinct and how were they related. So yeah, there's a lot of application for that.
Another question over here. Go ahead.
In the science field, what are some of the biggest discoveries you guys have made? Just doing tests and answering questions.
If not discoveries, what are some outstanding science and things you've done?
So for me, several years ago, a field that I've worked in, so you've all, I'm assuming, have you heard of HIV and AIDS, right? How many have heard of HIV-2? Do we know the difference here? So the HIV part in HIV/AIDS, HIV is the virus, AIDS ends up being the disease that ends up resulting from that. Well, there's HIV-1, which is the most common form of the virus that's out, but there's a second form of that virus called HIV-2 that's really more, the infection is more centralized into West Africa. And these viruses are very similar, and we took a look, and there's a whole panel of drugs that are set for treatment for HIV-1. And we took a look at those drug panels and how they would react to HIV-2 and found some significant differences. And what we found was important to the people in West Africa, because the drugs that, there's a difference in the availability of drugs between the US and more Western countries to third world countries and West Africa, and just the ability to be able to, some of these drugs are, can't handle heat, they're not stable. And what we found was that the treatment regimen, that if you were to follow the HIV-1 treatment regimen with somebody that was infected with HIV-2, that would be not the optimal treatment. It would be, you would develop resistance fairly quickly. So we were able to show that and then get the guidelines changed so people that are infected with HIV-2 now go through kind of a different path of treatment. And we're trying to identify drugs in that area that will be more effective for that. So that's something that I wasn't the lead person on that, but I was in a group that was working towards that. And so that's an area where it's more of an obscure virus, but it's important to those people that are infected with it, and it was something that I didn't go into it thinking that this is what we were going to come up with, but that was the result of it. So that's, yeah.
Thanks very much, Donovan. And to kind of add to this question, if I may, because it's really one of our last questions before we capture more questions from the group, is what are the exciting, if not discoveries you've made, what are the exciting things happening, the discoveries and other kinds of events that are happening at the places that you work?
So I'll jump in here. There are a couple of things that are really fascinating to me, especially in the technology and engineering side of things that we're doing. The average house, you could say it's about 1,700 square feet, and Fred Hutch is 1.7 million square feet. So it's 1,000 times the size of a house. And so you explode that with all of the equipment that we must have. If your hot water tank at home is a certain size, ours is 1,000 times that size, right? And so all that equipment that we have to run these labs is all networked. We have graphic network interface where we're able to take a picture of the campus, and some of you guys have seen this. You click on the building you want to see, and it pulls up a picture of that building, and then you click on the floor of that building that you might have a concern with, and you pull up the floor plan of that floor, and it tells you all the temperatures in each of the rooms. It can tell you about energy consumption, airflow, a lot of different stuff, which is really important for us. If a laboratory is having an issue or a heating or cooling problem, we need to know pretty quickly what's going on, and now we can respond to it just as quickly. We can identify, hey, this fan is shut down. Let's turn on this backup fan so that they get the cooling they need, and then we'll send out a work order to fix that broken down fan. So the technology is moving in that direction, and I think it's a fascinating part of it. The engineering side, we just acquired another building across the street. We love connecting our buildings with tunnels and sky bridges. We need that interconnection. And we're working right now on creating a tunnel underneath East Lake Avenue from that new building down into our boiler room. It'll come through there, and it'll allow all the glassware and supplies to come from that building across the street into the glass wash area of our existing buildings. So that way we don't have to use a bunch of disposable equipment in the labs that we would have to throw away normally. We get to wash that, and it's just more environmentally sound altogether. But with the tunnel, with the energy efficiency that's going into that new building, we have, instead of giant fans, multiple little fans. So if a big fan turns on or off, it's a set amount of energy. But if you have lots of little fans, just enough of them turn on for the amount you need or turn off, that saves tons of energy. And so that a building, thanks to engineers, architects, and facility managers, is a new standard in energy conservation.
Thanks. What are some of the things happening at Seattle Biomed, Jen?
So we have, Seattle Biomed is very focused on tropical health. We have a large TB program and a large HIV program, and they're doing a lot of interesting work. I'm more involved in the malaria side of things, and for us, our big focus, obviously, is on trying to develop a malaria vaccine. So we have the research aspect, where we have people, Stefan Kappa's group, who oversees the insectary. His group are working very hard on genetically modifying the parasite and trying to make a parasite that can't develop properly within a person. So it goes so far, it doesn't cause any disease, but then it stimulates immune response, much like many vaccines do. So he's working very hard on that, and that's very exciting. It's very novel and something that other people have worked on in very different ways. He has a very different approach to it. And we're also, within the clinical aspect, working very hard on actually running malaria trials. And we have a challenge center. So we run vaccine trials, and then we have people come in and we challenge them with malaria to see how effective the vaccine is. And we're one of only 4 places in the world that can do that. So it's something we've developed in the last few years, and it's very much on the increase in our work. But it's a very exciting time at Seattle Biomed.
It's very exciting. We're going to take questions in a second. I just want to hear from our other 2 panelists about exciting things happening for them or their organization now. What's going on?
Yeah, at ISB, there's a lot going on. So there's 10 or so different labs. They're all doing different things, but
Pick one really cool.
Yeah. So one thing that's cool, so my lab in collaboration with another one, we're trying to figure out how to make a renewable energy source using microbes. And there's a lot of people working on this, but the approach that we're taking is that we look at a microbe as if it's a circuit, sort of like a big, if you were going to take apart a radio, right, there'd be a lot of different wires, and there's a lot of different interconnected parts, and cells are just like that. And so what we're trying to do is 1, figure out what are all the parts that are in there, and 2, figure out the connectivity among them, among genes, proteins, and regulators. So if we can write the circuit diagram for a cell and show how a signal comes in and a response comes out, then perhaps maybe we can program the cell to have the response that we want in the environment that we want. So what we're trying to do is figure out how we can get a cell to produce the compound, perhaps some sort of renewable fuel source that we want. And to do that requires like a very comprehensive understanding of that cell. So our lab is also working on algae and trying to figure that out. So.
Fantastic stuff. Marianne, you want to close this part up?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the Hutch. I would say that one of the projects that I think is the most interesting is back to the theme of HIV. So this is a big center for working on HIV. And there are researchers working here who are are working on technologies that could actually cure someone of HIV. As you may know, part of the difficulty of treating, and which has precluded actually the cure of HIV, is that the HIV virus becomes part of your DNA or the infected person's DNA. And so then that's really, how do you get it out? You know, it's part of, I need my DNA, you know, to keep going. And there are new tools that our researchers here are working with that you can think of as molecular scissors. And so there's two ways of doing this. One, and both of which they're trying. One is using these molecular scissors to actually go into a person's DNA and clip out the HIV. If you can do that in enough cases, along with a combination of drug therapy, you could actually possibly get the viral load to go to nothing. The other possibility is HIV, to keep going, actually does need to reinfect immune cells. And so it has a little doorway that it goes through, and that's called a receptor. And that's been the approach that seems to work so far. It's been done in one case, this one particular patient, which we don't have to go into, where they got rid of that little doorway for HIV on this guy's stem cells, on his blood cells, and immune cells, excuse me, and the virus can't continually reinfect, and so now it seems to have disappeared. And so that's, you know, a possibility that for the past 20 or 30, you know, as long as HIV's been around, we've never thought you could actually get rid of it. You could suppress it, but not get rid of it. So I think that's a really, really exciting possibility, would be able to use these new tools and in combination with stem cell transplantation to eradicate HIV from people.
That's all very exciting. Thank you very much for all the great stuff that we're hearing. We have a few minutes left. We have 6 minutes left, by the way. We're supposed to finish for 10 to 2. Another group is coming in. But we have time for a number of questions. If the panelists can make their answers fairly succinct, we can get lots of questions in. So, any questions from the group? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know you referenced networking, you referenced coding, but how often does like kind of computer science stuff come into like research jobs as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. All the time. And the people who are most sought after now are the bioinformaticists. And they're the people who are maybe computer science majors or computer science and biology double majors who can speak computer science and coding and also know something about the biology. And in fact, at the Institute at ISB where I work now, I would venture to say that there are more computational biologists than there are people at the bench. And so
it's a definitely growing field. Very.
Well, it's also that you have to remember that in biology, we're gaining really large data sets now. They're, you know, following the sequencing of all these different genomes. There are many, many tools that people have sort of peripherally referenced here for asking, how does every single gene change when I put something in high salt or low salt? How does every single gene change when I, you know, do some other condition? Or what does the entire genome look like of this particular part of someone's tumor? And that's a huge amount of data. So we need people, we desperately need people who have the computational skills to be able to handle and analyze those large data sets. It's really a definite need in biology right now.
Yeah, the days of using Excel to understand your data.
Handle your data are long gone.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, 20, 25 years ago, it was you needed, you know, to be a good biologist, you know, exposure in biochemistry and those sciences. Computer science has become another one of those tools that you really need. It's like being able to know how to use a calculator. Because if you don't, and it doesn't mean you have to be completely fluent, but you need to know your way around how to do it, not be afraid to work from the command line or work for those type of things, which is, because if you don't, you become reliant on, it just makes you so much more of a powerful and employable person, whether it's biology, whether it's facilities management, if you know how those programs work and can work with those programs, that makes you just that much more able to do things by yourself.
Yeah, so remember when your parents are bugging you about the video games. You say,
Yeah.
This is my career.
Very quickly, follow on the math topic. Which field of math helps you the most?
Good question.
For me,
Statistics, calculus.
yeah, so for me, what I use most of the time is biostatistics. And that's what I like. I never took linear algebra, and I should have taken linear algebra because that helps with biostatistics.
Here's a question right here.
So we have a couple of different insectaries. So we have ones that we run a lot of rodent parasites. So we have mice in that we run parasites in for using them as a model for using human malaria. Obviously, we have a very secure facility and we have very strict rules in place to make sure that everything is contained. For the clinical aspect, then that's all done through the way any clinical trial works. You know, it's regulated by the FDA and we have to have approval for everything. People have signed informed consent and everything like that. So we try and use the most appropriate parasite for what we're trying to achieve. Obviously, we want to use the one that needs the least safety aspects at a time. But everything is very contained and controlled and very strictly regulated.
So we have time for maybe one more question, and then just to let you know that I believe some of the panelists will be here probably outside if you have further questions to ask them. That I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. So one last question? Anybody? All right.
I'm really happy to see that 3/5 of you are women because STEM areas are typically, there aren't as many women as men. Do you have any advice for the girls who are interested?
I would say a lot of biologists are girls. I would say there's a big split between biology and then going into physics and chemistry. It's definitely, and engineering is definitely much more male dominated. I would say from my experience, biology is very female dominant.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
So the frontier is in physics and chemistry.
But I think it falls onto what you were saying, you know, don't be scared of the maths and the physics. And then you can branch out into the engineering and the male dominated sciences and we can take over everything.
Question, the money's really big in the sciences, right? It's certainly something that you're not going to have trouble finding a job in if you know what you're doing, right?
No, that's right. If you've got the right tools and you hit on it, just having a broad base here really, because it's something that you said earlier on, is that it's showing more that your ability to be able to think and be inquisitive than it is one specific area they worked on. I mean, the field of study for me in the almost 20 years now that I've been doing this is that's changed several times. You know, I've worked on multiple different projects, and so if you have those base abilities, then you're always employable.
Great. So a lot of adaptability, a lot of possibilities, a lot of career possibilities. I want to thank our 5 panelists each very much for coming out for this Science Day. Thank you very much. We've got another group coming in, so whisk yourselves out. And